Hi, and welcome to the Art of Film Funding. I'm your co-host, Claire Papin, along with writer-producer Carol Dean, author of the best-selling book, The Art of Film Funding, and host of this show. Carol is the president of From the Heart Productions, a nonprofit organization that has supported filmmakers with the Roy W. Dean Grant, fiscal sponsorship, education, and resources for over 30 years. Carol also teaches the Learn Producing class. Each class features an industry expert guest instructor and is designed to give the information, guidance, and support to become a successful producer. You can learn more about this class and all of From the Heart Productions offerings at FromTheHeartProductions.com. Our special guest today is Jason Eric Perlman, named number 4 in LA Weekly's Top 10 Entertainment Professionals to Watch in 2023. Jason is an accomplished screenwriter, director, producer, and editor. He's worked with major television outlets and studios like Warner Brothers, Sony, and Lionsgate. His material has screened at prestigious festivals such as Sundance and South by Southwest. As a WGA screenwriter, Jason's work in both features and TV is always high concept and about superheroes, but not in the way you think. When consistently adapting IP, or in his prolific original work, Perlman focuses on grounded characters forced to challenge their human capacity and reach for the profound. In a word, inspiration, our true superpower. Today we'll discuss his new sci-fi thriller, Sight, which is his second feature film as both screenwriter and director.
Thank you so much, Claire, for the introduction. And thank you, Jason, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome. Our pleasure. For audiences unfamiliar with your new film, Sight, can you please tell us what it's about and what motivated you to make it?
Yeah, absolutely. Sight is about an American everyman who is a commercial real estate inspector. He's a family man. He has, a lot of the same workaday concerns we all do, nothing particularly remarkable on the surface, but he inspects a decommissioned 1970s particle accelerator. And if you know what that is, it's a giant science contraption that is used to create the energies that were around during the Big Bang. They hurled particles together, and this thing has been lying dormant for about 40 some years. And once he inspects this space, our character, Neil, our main character, starts seeing into other time periods. He starts seeing other places in the world at other disparate times. He also starts seeing the faces of people he doesn't recognize in his immediate family and friend group. And the film really goes on from there to unpack what he's been exposed to and why he is seeing these disparate people in these disparate times, and to make sense of it. I don't want to get out ahead of the reveal of why all that's happening to him, but the reason why I chose to work with this story and to work with some of the concepts in it came from a point in my own life when I was wrangling with karma, let's say, feeling that we live life in a certain pattern and some of the same problems visit us time and time again, and trying to understand why that is from almost a spiritual, metaphysical perspective. And writing Sight and doing the research into a lot of interesting world mystical thought in terms of reincarnation, in terms of the Kabbalah, in terms of a lot of Eastern mysticism that plays into this story, souls intersecting across time. That was my way of trying to gain a deeper insight into why a lot of us seem to find recurrent patterns in our life. As you get older, you start to see them more and more clearly. That every so often a cycle seems to repeat itself, and there's obviously a very grounded psychological reason for some of that, but I think there's also something deeper. And Sight was a very, very deep dive for me to try to explore those things.
Wow, that's really interesting. And although this is a fictional story, it opens with a reference to true events, specifically the 1931 invasion of Manchuria by the Japanese. And these days, this is not a particularly well-known historical event. And I wonder how it came on your radar and what motivated you to weave it into your film, which also involves reincarnation and time travel.
Yes, yes, great question. The process that it took to make Sight, I'm gonna backtrack a little bit to answer your question. Our key executive producer is actually from Indonesia, and she comes from Chinese parentage. Her family is from some of the northern provinces of China. I had known pretty pretty in depth about the Japanese invasion of northern China, Manchuria in the 30s. There was a lot of friction between Japanese and Chinese interests in that region well in advance of that turn of the century. And as some might know, in historical terms, there were some very, very tremendous atrocities that were committed during that time, war crimes in that conflict. Um, the reason to invoke it in our story was twofold. We wanted to reference something real in history that was pretty much exactly what you prefaced, and somewhat overlooked, at least in the West, atrocity that had happened in wartime. And I wrote this well in advance of some of the current world conflicts that we're also acutely aware of now. Obviously, the Ukraine and Russian conflict, the Hamas and Israel conflict. There's plenty of other ones that don't get as much airtime out there right now, too. So when we kind of projected into the future in writing Sight and conceiving the storyline, I had a lot of conversation with our EP, with our executive producer, who I told you had had heritage in that part of the world, and we discussed that interval of Japan's invasion of Manchuria and some of the very, very unsavory events that happened as a result. And we decided this would be an interesting and meaningful piece of history to invoke here, because again, without overstepping some of the plot in the movie, we wanted to also make sure that we were seeing a timeline and a real world set of events that were not only unfamiliar here in the West, but that were so unfamiliar to our main character that they were forced to reconcile with a cultural history and a set of real atrocities that were not part of his knowledge set, not part of anything he'd heard of or had any, even intellectual experience with, and confront him with having to both reconcile and understand that period of time as it started to impact him very directly. So, there's plenty of horrible things that humans have done to one another in the historical record. It's not a dearth of options to choose from, but we did want to explore something in relatively near field history, within the last 100 or so years. And we thought that this was a very interesting and portentous interval of conflict that we could explore in this story, that I think also ends up saying quite a bit about a cycle repeating that we're seeing play out in present day with our very near field immediate conflicts that are happening out there. So that was part of the rationale, and it also bears mentioning that my own wife comes from both Chinese and Japanese parenting. So she comes from a mix of those cultures, and when we first were dating years ago, it was very interesting to discuss how uncommon that pairing is. The Chinese and Japanese have quite a bit of lasting resentment from that conflict all those years and years ago, and it was just very interesting to see and hear and understand an inside cultural perspective of how a lot of Chinese and Japanese still are very much at odds about things that happened back then, and how lasting the grievances from that time period remain intact. So I hope that pretty much roundaboutly answers your question.
Yeah, it's a very interesting choice, and it's great to hear, about your decision making and why you included it. When you were 15, you crossed paths with a cult leader. Can you please share how that experience has impacted you in the stories you tell?
Yeah, it did quite a bit. When I was in my middle high school years, I took a 6-week trip that was billed as an environmental awareness, environmental science sort of college precursor trip. We were going to study sea turtles and ecosystems and so forth. That was the headline. Lo and behold, the individual who led that trip with 9 other kids from the country that I was on the trip with turned out to be a cult indoctrinator and cult leader in a very, very dark step. So those 6 weeks, and this was not to date my age too much, but this was pre-cell phones and in a very remote area. So there was not a lot of opportunity to connect with the outside world, to have any kind of recourse to our parents or any other authority figures during this. So it was a little Lord of the Flies, if you're familiar with that classic novel, that we were kind of in these remote regions with this very, very powerful and very sort of let's say he had some abilities that I still don't quite understand in terms of clairvoyance and knowing things about us that no one could know. Certainly, this was even before easy internet searching of people's backgrounds or anything about their life story. So there was a lot of eye-opening and shocking sort of enlightenment about what people are capable of in terms of, I wouldn't say paranormal, but parapsychology in a way. These sort of powers that I didn't really believe as a fairly rational kid that people were able to cultivate, but I believe, proven pretty otherwise during that experience. And that, even though I have no kind words to say about this individual or what he put us through, the experience did open my eyes to a whole different bandwidth of human capacity, both in terms of its ability for evil and darkness, but also its ability to sort of transcend some of what we believe are the general limits of the human mind and what it can know and how it can know it. And that stuck with me ever since then. And it put me on a journey of exploration in terms of things that I researched and things that I wanted to know more about. It never really translated into anything that I personally tried to to cultivate as an individual. I haven't tried to harness my psychic powers or move objects around with my mind or anything like that. But the experience certainly did inform my sense of human ability, and the types of stories and characters that remain intriguing to me have a lot of root in that experience.
Jason, I hope this will be a future film. There's no shortage of stories about, sort of like bad adults preying on children and, Boy Scout leaders and, in the church and so forth. But preying on people studying sea turtles, this is a fresh take on it. So
Yeah, it's its own
yeah,
niche. Absolutely.
yeah. So Sight is the second feature film that you've written and directed. Could you please talk a little bit about the writing process? How long did it take you to flesh out the script?
I began a first draft of Sight in about 2015. So that is a good, clean 10 years ago now. Hard for me to even imagine that that's the case, but I believe I set pen to paper, so to speak, about 2015, and had a very long lineage of people involved with this project alongside me, helping shape the story. We knew from early on that it was ambitious on a number of levels. I mean, just in terms of the complexity of the story, of how we were going to, on a relatively compact budget, how we were going to explore different time frames and different parts of the world at that. So we had to use quite a bit of sleight of hand, both in the script, in terms of how we were deciding to depict scenes so that they were producible and manageable on an indie budget, and also, the softer science of getting the characters and the arcs right. And there's a lot of different intervals of telling the story this way, telling it that way, ending it this way, having this conclusion, and it just shaped and kept sort of finding its crystalline structure. And eventually, as I brought the producers who I ended up actually shooting the film with, as I brought them on board about midway through that process. So I'd say about 2020, we had assembled the key team that was going to go forward with making the film, and with their input, and as I expressed earlier, with bringing our executive producer to the table and her cultural background and her imprint that has a really great signature, I think, on the storytelling. All of that evolved, year by year and note by note, to bring it to what we ultimately shot.
After the script was ready to go, how did you go about raising the money to make it? And I'm curious if you started that process alone or if you already had like-minded collaborators.
The process of finding financing went through a number of different stages and a number of different interested parties that sort of came to the table, and for whatever reasons at the time also departed from the table. We were at a bit of a tender crux in time, because we were getting ready to try to bring financing on board right as COVID took over the world. So, as you can imagine, there was a lot of financial interests that needed to kind of play turtle at that time and tuck back into their shell, because who knew what the world was even going to look like after that pandemic came and went. So we had a little bit of a touch and go timing to begin, but when I did meet our EP through an introduction, and we talked about this story, and she found as much personal relevance in it that I had hoped to convey to someone who was interested in backing the film. She got very excited about it, and that started to gestate our finance relatively relatively quickly, we started putting enough in play that we were able to hire a casting director and start to bring attachments to the movie. And as soon as we started to get some cast involved, that further, enhanced what we could envision as being our full needed budget. Um, and that was more or less the process.
Well, as already mentioned, this film deals in part with events that happened in Manchuria long ago, and there were some shots in the film with Chinese architecture. And I'm wondering if you shot on location in China, and if so, what was that experience like? And if not, how did you get those shots?
We shot in North Carolina, so very, very, very far away from mainland China, about as far as I think you can get. But we accomplished those, what I hope are pretty convincing, both exterior landscape and town, city shots of that period of China in two ways. We had a very, very savvy VFX team on board with us, and when we did a lot of pre-planning on those shots, we would build in this warehouse that we used basically as our studio. We rented this large warehouse that was actually had formerly been a textile mill in the early 1900s. It was a giant, just cavernous space, albeit unair conditioned and very poorly plumbed, that we used shooting in the dead of summer in North Carolina. So it was not it's not the most hospitable climate, but nevertheless, it gave us a lot of flexibility in building sets. And what we would do would kind of be build door frames or build the first bit of interiors of the Chinese structures, and then allow for green screens to be in play, even in moving shots where we knew we were going to match into landscapes outside of doorways or all together, overhead shots of whole environments. And we accomplished that two ways. We had actual stock footage that we licensed for some of those shots, particularly some of the aerial overheads. But we also had the great good fortune of our composer, who is a wonderful electronic artist and well known in that space, who goes by the moniker BV Dub. He's a fantastic, fantastic musician who I think did a really, really magical score for us. But he, at the time of our shooting and well into some of our post production, he was living in China. He was living in mainland China, where he actually was also working on his music, but he taught English in Chinese high schools. So he was there on the ground in China and was able to get us some footage from the areas around where he was living, which we were able to work into some of the green screen work and really get granular and authentic with some of those shots. And his presence during a lot of the time of the scoring, being in China as well, I think really informed some of the musical decisions that are in the film, that are imbued with some of the musicality of that part of the world too. So it was a bit of kismet, to be honest, that he was there, that we were able to get some shots very real time from real environments, and of course we leaned on stock libraries a bit.
Yeah, you did a great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, could you please talk about the process of selecting the actors to bring your story to life, and how much time you spent rehearsing before you began filming?
Sure. We worked with a really, really great casting director. One of our producers had already had a real long relationship of working with this casting director across a number of of movies. So they had a bit of a telepathy kind of already in place. And when she was brought to the table to work with us, a great casting director really takes the time to understand a piece of material and, the filmmaker's vision for it, and uses that to kind of stir in the cauldron to figure out who they believe might be reasonable to approach this cast, and who would also really nail the roles that we were going for. So we spent a lot of time in preliminaries with our casting directing team, talking about the story, kind of building out, sort of a vision board of who our ultimate embodiments of these roles might be, and then working into lists of potentials who, there are certain limitations in terms of availability, of where we were at as a budgeted film. So you take all that kind of stuff, all that criteria into the mix, and you start building lists of your tiered first pick, second pick, third pick down the line, and then approach those actors or their representatives, their agencies, etc. So we had a very in-depth casting process, more so than I think a lot of indies of our scale. We had a lot of roles to cast, and a little bit more complex than some movies, because we have people speaking, in Mandarin Chinese, we have Japanese speaking cast, and we wanted to do all of that extremely authentically too. So we had a casting director who was working on our English speaking leads. And then we also had a casting directing team who was working on our non-English speaking roles as well. So the casting process was rather in-depth and complex for this. So in terms of getting down to our final decisions, I was, as the director, I had the opportunity to speak with some of the cast that we were interested in and that were reciprocally interested in playing the roles. And we were, able to get a sense of one another and one another's sort of communication style and working style, and their view on the character, their view on the overall story. And a lot of those conversations ended up being the catalyst to decide who to cast, because when you find that someone really was understanding the intention of the character and understanding the overall intention of the film, and latching onto it and really finding something personal in it that they could draw from in playing, playing a role, that was the most kind of medicinal to me, to make those decisions, to know that the actor was really connected to not only bring something personal from their lives into whichever given role, but also, how that fit into the greater ambition of sort of the themes and intention of the piece as a whole. So in terms of rehearsal, almost none. To be fully candid, we were shooting on location. We were amassing our cast from very different points all over the country, and in some cases internationally, descending on our sets in North Carolina to work with us. And we were able to have some, we would sit and do some kind of table reads of scenes to sort of get into the flow of the characters in preliminary before getting into our initial shooting. But we did not have a lot of time to do full scale rehearsal with blocking, with physicality. We really ended up doing most of that on set, day and day when we were shooting given scenes. We would sometimes have conversations the night before we would go and do a shoot, to just kind of talk into the scene and go over a couple of directorial notes of motivation, and maybe where we put an adjustment here and there. But most of it was left to uh, the day of. And sometimes there's a bit of a captivity that can happen from rehearsing, because you sort of have a muscle memory of how you're going to play the scene and when you're going to hit this note or play this adjustment and so forth. And I think that can be great to bring into initial takes, because at least you have sort of a start point where you're not way out in left field and you got to rein in what you hope for the scene across burning, take after take. But there's also something very elegant and very sort of mysterious about where a great actor can kind of push things in the moment without a lot of sort of pretext of what they're going to do or what they think they're supposed to do in a given scene. And that allows really interesting discoveries to happen, especially when actors are playing off one another. It's infectious, it's contagious. If one goes a certain direction and plays an unexpected delivery of a line or an unexpected emotion in a given scene, then often a really present actor playing off them will pick that up and do something equally and reciprocally interesting. So we didn't have a hell of a lot of time to rehearse, but we really were able to, I think, find it on the days that we were shooting.
Well, I'm surprised to hear there wasn't like that much time to rehearse because without giving too much away, there is a scene in the film where someone is on a motorcycle and let's just say things don't go smoothly and a child is involved, a child actor. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about the logistics of filming something like that.
Yeah, that was a very, very, very difficult scene. We to fill that in a little bit more, we have a scene that's very pivotal in the early part of the film where our main character and his son are on a dirt bike, riding a dirt bike through woods. So we're not even on paved roads or you know, really kind of controlled linear surfaces. We're out literally riding a bike through thick trees and dirt rocky paths and things like that. So we ended up doing a lot of storyboarding and stunt crew planning for how to shoot that. And the way it was actually executed was getting a stunt rider who was, adept at riding these types of bikes to do the actual driving through the woods, and was able to actually, negotiate that as a rider. When it came to shooting our actual cast, seemingly on the bike, we did that with what's called a sled. So we would put the bike on basically a flatbed that's pulled behind a truck. So you get the impression that the bike is moving on its own engine, but you basically shoot the top of the wheels up and give it a little shake, so it looks like the characters are kind of turning with the curves and they're negotiating, hitting bumps and rocks and things like that, and it looks very convincing. And then when you get into editorial, you're basically cutting between the stunt rider, who also had a dummy mannequin that was custom built by our special effects team to mimic the exact sort of size and look of our child actor. And we would shoot those shots at enough distance that it wasn't easily perceived that that was a dummy, basically a stuffed, weighted duplicate of our child actor on the bike. And we just shot it a number of ways. We shot it with drones. We shot it with a follow car with our cinematographer riding on it, getting shots of the bike. it was a pretty much an almost full day shoot to get all that footage and to deal with what you can readily imagine were many problems and kinks that arose trying to get that to go smoothly. But I'm very proud of what we ultimately did shoot, and I think it looks about as believable as it reasonably could. But it was complicated. A lot of pre-planning, a lot of storyboards, a lot of almost kind of editing the scene ahead of shooting it to know how it would envision how it would cobble together and be realistic.
Well, yeah, I think you did a great job. And you've already touched a little bit on the use of sci-fi, I'm sorry, not sci-fi, but special effects in this film, with the scenes in Manchuria. And like most sci-fi these days, special effects are used to convey certain things. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about the process of working with the team responsible for those visuals.
Yeah, absolutely. About about 6 months out from even longer, perhaps, maybe even closer to a year out from when we started filming, we started reaching out to VFX, visual effects companies, and starting dialogues with them about the particular needs of the film and how they might go about realizing them, and to basically give us sort of a previs, a take on how they would approach some of the very specific special effects or visual effects, I should say, that we needed in the movie, and to hint at some of that a bit more. Not only did we have trying to realistically portray different parts of the world, like the Manchuria scenes or something like the bike scene we were just discussing, but we also have quite a bit of people's faces changing from one to another. We also have quite a bit of environments shifting from seemingly one environment to another in a very sort of hallucinogenic way. And we wanted to make sure that our visual effects team was artistically and aesthetically very much on board with how we wanted to realize those things. We didn't want to do them in an expected, we've seen this all before type of hackneyed way. We wanted to do something that was new and unique and felt much more organic than some versions you see of that kind of stuff. So we reached out to, I think we probably spoke to in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 companies. And quite frankly, we kept finding sort of a creative impasse, even as much as we would use sort of reference points of other material that we liked that was doing somewhat similar stuff, or even things that were way off the map, like paintings and photographs that we thought kind of dealt with the vibe of some of this really deftly. We just weren't getting the resonance with some of these VFX companies to see what we wanted to see. And needle in a haystack, we found the right partner who really understood what we were trying to do, and almost right out of the gate were giving us kind of representative pre-visualization samples that even over and above enhanced what we thought we were going to do, with coupled with their ideas brought to the table. So we knew we had found the right partner, and once that clicked into place, we started having to break down the script in every single scene where there was going to be VFX needed, and analyze with them very, very, very granularly how we were going to shoot each and every one of those scenes. And each one, in some regards, was a little different, but the technique that we was pretty much their brainchild of how to do this technically, based upon what we wanted to realize creatively, uh, came down to some very, very interesting on-set techniques that we had to do. Like, for instance, when we were shifting one character's face into another, or their whole body into another, or a whole environment into another, we would have to do almost an exact tracing where we would take a still of what we were shooting on the A side of part of the scene, where one character is beginning the scene but has to transition into another character, let's say, and we would have to basically trace them identically as if we had a big piece of tracing paper over top of the shot, and then shoot it again, and often put a green screen into place if we were going to change the environment around them, and do that in stages so that we could kind of graduate the effect, from where we started from to where we were ultimately going to end up. And it was very technical, and it was very laborious. And the first couple of times we were shooting it, we didn't honestly get it right. We had to go back and learn from a handful of early mistakes, and sort of streamline the process. But by the time we were, a couple days into shooting VFX scenes, we really got the recipe down, and we were fortunate enough to have a supervisor on set with us from that same VFX company who was, really running point on exactly where the camera needed to be, where the actors need to be positioned, lighting on backgrounds that we knew would need to be a very specific kind of light to be able to transition to another environment seamlessly. It got pretty technical, but also very rewarding when all was said and done, to see that it did indeed work seamlessly, and we were able to get the effect and get the transitions that we were envisioning. That was a very, very rewarding part of this whole process, because quite frankly, it was a little bit of a leap of faith. It's kind of like the analogy of old film still cameras, which I don't think anybody even remembers anymore. But you'd take a picture with a still camera with film in it, and you wouldn't really know what you got until a couple weeks later, after you got it developed. If it's in focus, or if there was something on the lens, you had no real idea. And that was a little bit of the same type of faith we need to bring to bear on some of these VFX, because until we got into editorial and started really getting the different VFX artists to composite shots and pull out backgrounds and all that stuff, we didn't really know 100% if we had gotten it right. But ultimately, we got close enough that we achieved what we set out to do, which was very gratifying.
Well, I definitely have follow-up questions I'd love to ask, but in the interest of time, I want to jump ahead and talk a little bit about distribution and getting a film, an indie film out into the world. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about, that part of your journey, and where, people are going to be able to see the film, in the months ahead and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. We did not have any distribution on board when we went into shooting. We did not have any companies, working with us to put the film out into the world. Once we had cut together a fair amount of the film in order to put basically a trailer of sorts together, and a couple of key scenes that we had cut in editorial, we did start showing distribution companies and sales companies those bits and pieces. And nowadays, a lot of times, a company, based on cast and based on knowing what the genre of the film is, will take an early interest, because certain things do well in the marketplace, and certain things are a bit more challenging. So at the time, sci-fi thriller that edges into some horror elements as well, was very appealing to to companies, and I hope it still is. And we were able to secure a sales company that worked to get us a distribution deal. And we do currently have a distribution deal in place, and we have sold the film to a number of foreign international territories as well. That process is still ongoing. The sales process is pretty languorous and laborious these days. It's not quite as I think fast as it used to be, for a whole number of market reasons and changes in just the whole distribution pipeline that's happened over the last 5 to 10 years. But we are tentatively releasing the movie the middle of this summer. It'll have a small theatrical run, as well as appearing in all the usual suspects for rental and streaming online. It's a little early to give you an exact date because a lot of that is still forming presently, but it does look like either mid-July or mid-August would be our theatrical release. So I'm certainly happy to keep you posted on that as it evolves. It's a very active conversation that's happening right now, and we'll know more crystallized very soon.
Well, I think while we're on the topic, would you mind sharing with us the website for the film and the social media handles, and also if you have your own, personal website and socials so that people will know, where to look?
Yeah, absolutely. Across all of our social for the film and our website is called Enter the Site, spelled just like the title of the movie. So enter the site, site.com is our website. Enter the Site is also on Instagram and Facebook, where we'll be posting everything about the upcoming release dates, a lot of bits of teasers and imagery from the film that we're starting to put out there more and more as well. I don't personally have a website just for me. My production company does indeed have a website that covers a lot of projects that are both mine and part of greater teams that we have moving through different stages of development right now. You can look up our company website, which is Entelechy, which is spelled Entelekey, Entelechy. I'll spell that one more time. Entelekey.com. Excuse me, entelekymedia.com. Sorry about that. Yeah, so Entelechy Media is our greater production company, and you can see information about our projects and things in the pipeline and other things that are gestating in both film and television there.
Great. And as we've mentioned, this is the second feature that you've written and directed. And I was wondering if you could just briefly tell us a little bit about the first one, and also, what you're working on now. Do you have another project, another script ready to go that you're trying to push out into the world?
Yeah. So my first film is a contained sci-fi thriller called Threshold that I made back, I think we shot that around 2016, so quite some time ago. That film is very similar in some regards to some of the themes explored in Sight, which I guess stretches back to some of what we discussed earlier with what really has stuck with me in terms of themes and characters and sort of metaphysics that I love to explore in my work, from perhaps that fateful sea turtle journey gone wrong, as we can put it. But Threshold is what I like to think of as a really, really interesting thriller about belief and how belief can be both an asset and a real a real enemy to relationships too. And it takes place in a very, very interesting context where people don't know exactly what's going on in the world across one night. Is the world ending? Is there some kind of apocalypse going on? Is there some sort of alien invasion? Are angels coming to the earth to change people's whole trajectory on the planet? There's all these different sort of theories about what's going on, and we see it through the lens of a couple who's grappling with what might be happening, and this woman who breaks into their house in this very fateful night and is seemingly feeding them information from beyond, from some other plane of existence, which is certainly enhancing both their and us as an audience, our questions about what really is happening, what do we believe, and seeing the characters wrestle with that as well. So a lot of some of the same kind of mystical themes that are taken up in Sight had their first announcement, I think, in my prior film, and probably will have plenty more in my upcoming films too, because there's a lot to explore in all those realms, and that certainly plays into stuff that I am working on now. Um, I'd like to think I am getting pretty good at juggling. I have quite a lot going on at present, both in TV and film. I wrote and am co-producing another feature that we're in pre-production and in early cast conversations and company conversations with right now. It's a larger scale movie based on some true IP about a very famous and fascinating real world treasure hunt. So seemingly a bit of a departure in theme from some of my more kind of metaphysical concerned work, but it's actually not. This has a lot to do with a very deep character study about a lot of these same kind of ideas about what we believe in, and how far we're willing to go in service of a dream or a belief, and what toll and cost that extracts. Really interesting story, and frankly, I love to work with real stories, with real things that are true stories that have happened, because I think you can find so much meaning and expressive content in reality, and ask some of these bigger questions by way of it, as opposed to pure invention. So, also on that same point, I have a television story project that we originally developed with Warner Brothers, that's taken on a current new life that we're in early pre-production on as well, that has an environmental theme and is actually about some of the grassroots efforts that were undertaken in Los Angeles to clean up the air here. There was a terrible, terrible air crisis across many decades in Los Angeles, and the car companies fought the people of Los Angeles tooth and nail, and tremendous gaslighting and lies about their cars causing the air issues and the health issues that were just rampantly out of control in Los Angeles for decades. A very timely David and Goliath story about enacting meaningful environmental change from grassroots uprisings. I think that's a message and a story that the world is sorely needing right now, as our climate seems to spiral more and more out of control by the day. And I also have two other TV projects that are rattling through the pipeline, and one other feature film that is in sales conversations right now. So quite a bit. And I'm also finishing a large scale sci-fi follow-up project that I don't know how we're going to make this one, because I think I've let my imagination run maybe a little too wild. But I'll rein it in when the time comes. But in any event, a lot of interesting things going on. I try to keep busy, and yeah, that's I think the roundabout of it.
Yeah, you have a lot going on. And what advice, Jason, would you give to first-time filmmakers?
Wow, where to begin? Um, I think the most important thing, really, quite honestly, and I don't want it to sound trite, but it's to really hold fast to your creative vision. Too many people, I think, call it a brand these days, and I think that cheapens it a bit. But, you know, really home in on what you as an individual have to say and why you say it through the medium of film, right? There's plenty of artistic outlets that are far less expensive and far more approachable to get creative gratification from, whether it's painting or writing a book, or those things are a little bit more autonomous and a lot easier to, not easy to do. They require obviously great artistry, but they're easier to do than assembling hundreds of people to see a film realized. But if the medium of film, for any number of reasons, is the conduit for your voice as a creative person, then really, really homing in on all the facets that comprise filmmaking, the music, the visuals, the performative aspects, of course, from actors, finding your distinct stamp with the amalgam of those creative facets, I think is really first and foremost, really trying to feel into what you yourself bring to the table uh, in working with those aspects that are so intrinsic to film, and then a little bit out of the ether of just finding your creative voice, the more practical and perhaps equally important uh, awareness that one needs to have, especially as a first time filmmaker, is how can you distill those creative unique aspects into something that you can actually get made. And in terms of actually getting made, a genre and a type of material that that the marketplace is receptive to. Not to say that you want to paint by numbers or just do what you think people are buying or liking out there. That's not what I'm suggesting. But certainly being mindful of what kind of material gets made, and then using your own creative stamp to try to work, somewhat within the brackets of a piece of material that you feel has viability in the marketplace. And then I think secondarily to that, trying to figure out how to make it with the least expense and logistical complexity you possibly can. How I like the analogy of how many parts can you pull off of a plane and still get it in the air? That's, I think, the reductive logic you have to kind of apply to first time films. Can you do it all in one location? Can you do it with just two actors? Can you do it with one actor? Uh, there's ways to take very high concept and very audience receptive material and distill it down to some very bare essences that you can approach in terms of smaller budgets, in terms of less complexity of multiple locations, and in the complexity of hiring larger cast to complete the film too. So I think I'd say three key kind of totem poles to be aware of are your own creative voice as it pertains to the aspects of film, particularly. Then what can you do with a story that coheres with sort of marketplace interest? And how can you do it, third most, how can you do it for the least amount of cost and the shortest amount of shooting schedule you possibly can to ensure that someone might give you the chance financially and otherwise to go ahead and make it. I think those are the important pillars of your first outing. They certainly were for me. So
Well, that's great advice. And before we wrap up, is there anything else you would like to share with our audience that I haven't already asked you about?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I would just say, because I hear it so many times across a given day in so many different conversations on whichever project it might be. There's a lot of discouraging uh, chatter in the film business, and I think in the media sphere at large, about where the future goes from here. I mean, obviously, AI displacing human elements in the creative arts has become more and more of a concern, no matter how much even the unions have tried to beat that back from taking people's jobs in the industry. But the fundamental thing I suppose that I would say is, even though there's so much discouraging talk out there about how hard it is to get this or that made, or the streamers are making less shows now, and budgets are tightening and belts are tightening, and how many projects get out there in a given year now, some of that might be true, but that kind of cynicism is basically always part and parcel of these endeavors. You're going to hear that kind of thing day in, day out, no matter what the era is, no matter what the threat out there might be. There's always that kind of stuff being kicked around. And yeah, this stuff is hard. It's really, really hard. Make no mistake about it. It's really hard to get a project made and out into the world. It is. And it will extract everything it possibly can from you. There's no doubt about it. But I think, for those creatives listening and working on their projects and believing in what they have to say and what they want to put out there, despite all the naysaying and the admitted complexity of the marketplace, don't worry about it so much. There's definitely a pathway when something's great and something's meaningful, that it finds its breath at the surface. No matter how long it has to swim, it gets there. So I say stay the course. Hold fast to your belief in your material, and try to shut off the noise. That's what I do.
Well, those are great closing words, some encouragement for our fellow filmmakers out there. Thank you so much, Jason, for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us, and for all the wisdom you've shared with us. And I'm sure, the audience listening, joins me in looking forward to seeing what's next for you. So, yeah, thanks again for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thank you, everyone, for listening.
Now, in its second edition, Carol Dean's popular book, The Art of Film Funding, has 12 new chapters to cover all areas of film financing and how to avoid expensive pitfalls. Learn how to start with an idea and end with a trailer, how to make an ask for money, create your story structure and your trailer, legal advice, fair use, successful crowdfunding, how to ask for music rights, and what insurance you can't shoot without. Available on Amazon under Carol Dean and at FromTheHeartProductions.com. I want to remind our listeners that David Rakelin is a brilliant and talented award-winning musician who scores films and can compose music for a trio or for a full orchestra. David is a very good friend to the independent filmmaker and comes highly recommended by From the Heart Productions. If you need music to help tell your story, please contact him at davidrakelin.com. That's David, RAIKLEN.com. And Carol and I want to thank you for tuning in to The Art of Film Funding. please visit our website at FromTheHeartProductions.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. Good luck with your films, everyone.